Fade and Rock got back to the lab and began to discuss their next steps with Arissa and their research. First came Arissa. Fade had become attached over the past few days, and Arissa was at the forefront of Fade's thoughts. She had taken care of Fade, and it was his turn to return the favor. Rock told Fade that her punishment may be severe. She had disobeyed the council's orders and defied them. What could she have done to create such a problem? Fade asked. Rock glanced over to one of the lab's tables and began to explain. We had learned all that we could from the unliving's unanimated corpses. We needed live experiments, if you could even call them that. Arissa retrieved the specimen. She was very careful, but she cut off its limbs and lower jaw, but the council found out, and despite my best efforts to convince them, the keepers felt that her disobedience was inexcusable. Arissa escaped and exiled herself rather than be executed, and has been gone ever since. Fade regrettably exclaimed, "It's my fault she came back." Rock looked at Fade with pity. "It was her decision to return, Fade. The best way to help her is to yield some result from our research. Arissa can handle herself." Fade had seen Arissa handle herself. Rock was right. After the scouts return, the council will see the truth. The two lab partners delved even further into their research, determined to find something that they could use. They knew that Fade's mind controlled the virus. They just didn't know how. They knew that the electric shock to his system may have had some influence. In either case, they needed a brain scan of Fade to compare with a regular human's, and with an unliving, animated brain, this posed a problem. The council could never allow them to bring an animated undead. The past day's activities had made Fade's appetite peak. He would have to eat, and soon. The two collaborators started their research, scanning the corpse's brain and then Fade's. Into the wee hours of the night, the research continued. Test after test revealed only new questions until they examined the temporal lobe. What they discovered was quite interesting. The temporal lobe was the only region to not have mimicked cells in it. The two deduced that this meant that Fade's ability to store memories and control himself beyond basic instinctual drives was based on the frontal lobe's cell's ability to use memory as a control harness for the virus, rewiring it to work for the body instead of for itself. Even further research revealed that Fade's memories were still there. He just needed stimulants to help him remember. This also meant that Rock could use Fade's cells to make an immunization serum so that no other people could be infected by the virus. Fade and Rock had been up all night, and Rock was getting tired. He needed to present his findings to the Keeper's Council. He told Fade to wait in the laboratory. Fade agreed and said he would start putting notes together for the serum. That morning, the council reconvened and began the discussion on Arissa. It was decided fairly quickly that Arissa would be executed for her defiance of the council. They sent the guards to retrieve her from the holding cell. Directly after the decision had been made, Rock burst into the council's chambers and began to excitedly rave about the immunization of the human race. Skeptical, Dowd asked, "How do you know this process will work?" The doctor replied, "I don't, but it shouldn't be thought of in that manner. It should be thought of as a last resort. It could be deployed in a gas through the city's ventilation system." As Rock's argument continued, Arissa and her guard detail entered a side door of the chamber. Rock noticed that the events and asked what was going on. The council informed him that they had made their decision. Rock blurted out, "But the scouts haven't even returned yet. They could reveal that Arissa is trying to help." The council was silent, and as Rock pleaded, Arissa was silent as well. The guards grabbed Rock and began to usher him out. A young man thrust himself through the large metal city center's doors. Out of the breath and exhausted, he stumbled into the guards and collapsed. The guards picked up the boy. Dowd realized it was a scout. The other keepers were soon to follow in the realization and asked what he had learned. The scout's head hung low. He quietly whispered, "She's right. An army. They're coming." Arissa shouted, "Do you see? The city must be abandoned. We have 7 days. There's still time." Dowd Dowd quieted Orissa with a forceful palm in the air. The scout was trying to say something. "There is no time. 3 days," he slowly and quietly stated. Orissa was shocked. How so soon? It took her an entire day in her jeep to reach the city. On foot, that would take 9 days, not 3. The council looked over the pictures and the scout had brought back. They shuddered in disbelief at what they were looking at. Dowd called out to one of the guards, "Gather all the people together in the dome. We must notify the people. They have a decision to make. And take the prisoners back to her cell." Fade noticed that the staff in the lab was leaving. He followed suit and proceeded with them, keeping his distance. As he approached the city center and watched the people gather there, he made his way into the back of the crowd and shrouded his head with the cloak Orissa had left for him. Soon the room was nearly full. Thousands of people had gathered. Out of the city center's pillar, on a perch above the crowd, walked Dowd. He quieted the nervous citizens and began to speak. "Citizens of Flint, today is the day unlike any other. Today there is a new danger looming. A trusted scout has brought back evidence of a horde of undead headed towards our peaceful city," he said as his voice echoed from the dome's shape. Gasps flew out the crowd. "Do not be afraid. Our walls have always protected us, and our soldiers have always kept us safe. I come to you now with an offer. Those who would like to leave the sanctity of our city may do so uninhibited. Some say this horde is so dangerous and our city is not prepared. I say we fight this new menace together and show them why we are still here." The crowd roared in support of Dowd's words. Rock heard the words and shielded his head away in shame, knowing that Dowd may have damned the entire city. Rock had picked up the scout so that he could hear the speech also. The young man said quietly to Rock, "It was the damnedest thing I ever saw, Doc. So many. They were so quiet and ran so fast." Ran, Rock thought. The council had no idea what it was up against. As the crowd thinned after the speech was concluded, Rock angrily carried the boy past Dowd and nudged Dowd's shoulder. "You have doomed us all. This boy knows the truth," Rock whispered angrily. Dowd paused for a second and pondered. He directed the doctor to take the scout back to the lab and get him fixed up. Fade spotted the two leaving the city center and proceeded to aid Rock in carrying the damaged scout. The boy had passed out now from exhaustion, and so Rock filled Fade in about what had happened. The keepers had a naive faith in their city's defenses and wanted to believe so much that they are safe that they ignore the very real new threat. As the three reached the lab, Fade's hunger was almost unbearable. Rock and the scout were so tired that they knew barely alive, and Orissa was being held in a detention cell. The doctor and Fade laid the scout down on one of the lab's tables to let him rest. Rock was barely able to dress his wounds, so Fade volunteered his services for Rock could get some sleep on the bench in the observation room. After the scout's wounds were dressed and Rock had fallen asleep, Fade grabbed a backpack and rushed off. His hunger would overtake him soon, and he had begun to lose his facial substance. He was looking more like a walking corpse and less human. He exited the lab and ran through the facility as fast as he could towards the front gate. He now had Dowd's permission to leave, and it was a good thing because if he had to face any obstructions, he would surely eat his way through them. It was cloudy, and a little rain had begun to fall. One of the gate guards opened the first courtyard gate for Fade. Once it had shut and the guards confirmed the all clear outside, they opened the outer gate. Fade rushed towards the roadway and would lead him to the undead mob, and he was on his way. After about 2 hours of walking in the rain, Fade was losing control. He needed to get far enough away from the city to keep from hurting anyone. He staggered and then saw it, a lone wandering corpse. The smell overtook his senses, and he rushed to the poor lost soul and began to devour his much-anticipated meal. By the time Fade's hunger had caused him to become savage again, and as he finished dining, he collapsed unconscious. The following morning, Rock woke up on the bench and quickly pulled himself together, requesting some coffee from a passing nurse. As he entered the lab, the door behind him closed just loudly enough to wake the slumbering scout. "How do you feel?" asked Rock. "Better, I guess," said the scout with a southern drawl. The thin but muscular scout was clearly a military man. He had a slight southern accent that he tried to hide with his ordered manner, but it was clearly there. He tried to get up, and the doctor urged him to rest. "We have to tell him," the scout said. Rock replied. "We will, but we must do it quietly, or Dowd will surely have us executed. Go home to your quarters and tell your family. Gather all the supplies you can and meet me in the vehicle storage facility." The guy nodded and started to get up. As he did, a squad of council guard entered the room and took the scout by his arms. "The boy is coming with us under the authority of the keepers. You, doctor, will stay here and work on the serum," the commanding officer stated. With a nod and a look of unease, the doctor agreed. Orissa, still in her cell, was growing restless. She was taken away before she had heard what had happened with the scout. As she stirred about her cell, the detention center door opened, and in walked the guards with a new prisoner to keep her company. It was the scout. The guards threw him in the cell next to Orissa as he shouted angrily obscenities about the guards' mothers. Orissa looked over at him. Their eyes met. She asked, "What is your name, Scout?" He replies, "Argus." Argus was a smaller man, maybe 5'10" tall. He had a muscular build and a clean-shaved face with a short black haircut. She inquired about recent events, and Argus told her everything. Orissa regretted coming back now. Her actions had been for nothing. In 2 days, the city would fall. Argus began to lose control and started to freak out. Orissa calmed him and said, "With this army on its way, don't you think this is the safest place for us to be? Besides, when we need to get out, we will. You can be sure of that," Orissa said. With all the people who knew the truth about the undead army locked up, Dowd was now free to prepare for the oncoming assault. All available soldiers were to man the front entrance walls, and explosives teams riddled the front entrance with mines. Dowd felt good about the situation. It had been a long time since he had been able to show the people of Flint how well he could prepare them. Ammunition was at the ready, and civilians even supported the effort with weapons on the inside of the walls and inner courtyard. Fade woke up in a haze. He could hear the voice again. It sounded different this time. Not much different, but it was noticeable. The zombie horde had reached the city of Flint and had slowly started to mass several miles outside its gates all around him. It was organized. The dead were quiet. No speaking, moaning, or any other sounds from the vast crowd of unliving. It was an eerie silence. Though Fade was terrified of what was happening, he decided to head for high ground for a better view. Fade slowly separated himself from the crowd, cautiously avoiding attention until he was clear of their sight. Fade hid in the ridge ahead of the crowd so that the city gate was in clear view about 500 feet away. There was nothing for him to do but wait. Dowd looked for the unliving army with confusion. "Why do they stay so far from the city gates?" he thought. "Captain!" Dowd shouted firmly. "Sir," the captain answered. "Have one of your snipers pick off one of those undead," Dowd ordered. "Yes, sir," the captain replied with a grin. The several hundred zombies in sight gave the sniper plenty to shoot at, and the zombies uncharacteristically stood flat-footed. The snipers lined up to take the shot. The zombie's head popped like a balloon as Dowd looked on with satisfaction. The rest of the zombies' heads turned around towards the fresh kill, then, in unison, turned back towards the gate and started sprinting. And over the ridge of the hillside swarmed countless more undead into view of the city. It appeared that the horizon moved like the edge of an ocean wave. Dowd's stomach dropped as he looked on in unabated terror. "Fire at will!" Dowd barked. The onslaught ensued. As it did, Fade heard the voice direct the army of undead. It wasn't just guiding them, as it was in the city square of Stark. The voice commanded the thralls of undead in an organized and precise fashion. The mass approached the minefield, and a look of intense anticipation crept over the faces of the soldiers as they watched for the first explosion. What happened next was an unexpected horror. The flood funneled themselves into a line, and as they crossed the minefield, one after another exploded and was quickly replaced by another until they reached the front gate. The soldiers on the wall concentrated their fire to peak the funnel closest to the wall. The bodies began to pile one on top of the other until 20 feet of wall became 10, then 5. The ammunition was running low, and as more began to get delivered from the armory stockpile, Dowd became increasingly uneasy. Fade watched as the soldiers were occupied with the overwhelming number of unliving on their gates and saw that some of the undead were quietly and carefully feeling their way through the hollowed minefield. One of them found a mine, then another was dug up. In a coordinated effort, the two made their way into the funnel and raced towards the wall and up the hill of corpses that were butted up against the wall. One of the soldiers saw the mine being carried by the first zombie. He shouted out, "Bomb!" Dowd saw it and shot the zombie himself. If it were to explode so close to the wall, it would clear a path for the flood to breach the wall. Another zombie picked up the old explosive and continued on with it. It was killed then. Dowd instructed hastily to shoot the explosive. All soldiers took aim, but the army of dead protected it and hid it in front and hid it from sight. Then the second zombie bomb carrier busted through and unseen and all collided like a rock with wall. Boom! Chunks of wall, soldiers, and zombies were hurled through the air, creating a cavity in the protective wall that the zombies filled with overwhelming number. The second mine went off, spreading the cavity even wider. Dowd retreated with his guard to the city center. Fade saw he was retreating and slipped past the unliving thrall. They weren't biting, though. They began to surround and herd the remainder of the defense forces. Fade quickly ran inside to the detention center where Orissa had been kept. He took the keys that were just laying on the floor, abandoned by the soldier who had them, and entered the detention center. He yelled out for Orissa, but there was no answer. Again he yelled, "Orissa!" Orissa walked around a corner with Argus protected behind her. "Took you long enough," she sarcastically stated. "Let's find Rock," she said. "I will find Rock," Fade replied. "They don't even notice me. I can enter and find him much easier than you. I can save him, Orissa. Trust me." Orissa nodded in agreement. Orissa stated, "We will flee the city and..." Fade interrupted. "No, just hide. They will leave after a short time." Orissa asked, "How do you know?" The voice he heard, not only could he hear it, but he could tell that it wanted. Not only could he hear it, but he could tell what it wanted and what it was there for. It wanted the people alive. Fade slowly and carefully made his way to the lab where he found Rock, being held by two unliving assailants who had destroyed the lab. Rock saw Fade in his full natural state. Breath was gone. Fade looked just like one of them. Fade reached for one of the undead men's arms that was restraining Rock and tried to pry it loose. He could feel the voice moving nearer. He tried again. Nothing. The voice was even closer now. Fade was getting nervous. Closer still. There was no time. "Let's go," he shouted. The two zombie cuffs released their hold on Rock. The voice quieted itself. It was stunned. "Retreat!" The voice was leaving. The doctor fell to the ground and Fade quickly picked him up. "Can you walk?" Fade asked. "Yes," the doctor replied. The undead disappeared quickly, and the citizens of Flint with them. Flint was a desolate, burning waste now. Nothing was left of the power system, and even the food and supplies had been taken. There were no bodies left. It was completely void of everything. Besides the splatters of the wall and the demolished instruments and equipment,